Let's talk about Galadriel, sword wearing, and the Rings of Power. Hi folks, I've got a special guest with me here today, Zach Evans, and you can check out his channel. I'll put the link right below. He is, amongst other things, a jouster and a reenactor.
I am indeed. Yeah.
And we're filming some videos today, mostly looking at armour and things like that related. We'll see those in coming videos. But we just got chatting about, you'll notice, we are wearing our swords in a jaunty fashion, a la Galadriel. And Zach pointed that out to me, that she doesn't wear the sword on the back like I so often criticise in so many of my videos. She actually just slings it across, doesn't she?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the show, they are wearing them on their backs, but then later on in the photo that is often criticised, where she's got it on her back, she's just slung it over her shoulder like a guitar.
Or a backpack. Or,
yeah. And she actually wears it at her hip.
Yeah. So that's fine. We don't have an issue with that, do we? And I actually really like the fact. So I haven't finished watching yet, so don't spoil me. But I liked the episode that I was watching yesterday. She's actually just carrying the sword in her hand, and that's one of the things I often point out in videos I've made is that often in the medieval period, people just carried swords in their hand because, you know, wearing a sword's great if you need your hands free, but if your hands aren't occupied with something else, actually just carrying it is often the most convenient thing to do, isn't it? If you're getting on and off horses and all that kind of stuff.
And I've personally had big problems with swords. I've smashed an entire replica glass drink set just by turning around too quickly with my scabbard.
It's like the Laurel and Hardy kind of plank joke, isn't it? And it's difficult. And no matter, I mean, there are some ways which are more showy for wearing swords, and there are some ways which are more utilitarian for wearing swords. And I think probably, like in the British Army, the culmination was the Sam Brown belt, where it's basically almost practically vertical and it's quite high up, and that's a pretty damned practical way of wearing a sword. However, in the modern world, there are some things, even if you're wearing a sword like that, like you wouldn't be able to get into a car. No. You'd literally have to take off your entire belt thing to get, you know, and even getting on and off horses, you've got to be quite wary of what the sword's doing and stuff like that, haven't you? So, but that also got us onto, just very briefly, if you will humour us, talking about our views of the Rings of Power. Now, I think we've both noticed that the internet has been full of a lot of rage about the Rings of Power. And I don't really share that for a number of reasons. Firstly, I've quite enjoyed the series, but second, I'm not a massive Tolkien fan. My first exposure to Tolkien really was through the Peter Jackson movies. And I think I have a vague memory that we read The Hobbit at school when I was a small child, but I have no memory of it whatsoever. So for me, I'm someone who, you know, I was in my 20s when I was watching those movies, and they were great and everyone loved them, and it meant loads of new people were getting into HEMA and reenactment and everything else like that, and loads of people were collecting swords suddenly, and I enjoyed those movies. And then if I had never read any of the Wikipedia pages about the background of Galadriel or anything like that, then as far as I was concerned, what is being shown in the Rings of Power could be a completely plausible prequel to those movies. I mean, there's some differences, obviously, but
and I kind of feel like it's been treated very differently. Loads of people are comparing it to House of the Dragon, which I've not seen,
which is just a completely different.
It is a different thing, but we know House of the Dragon, when it came out, they said, right, there are some differences to George R.R. Martin. Consider it a slightly different alternative
interpretation, whatever,
and yet there seems to be an unwillingness to do that with Rings of Power.
So we were chatting before we hadn't planned to make this video, but I thought it would be an interesting talking point. I know that lots of you hate Rings of Power, and that's absolutely fine. But equally, I know lots of you like it. Lots of people I know have enjoyed it. Some of them are Tolkien fans, some of them are just casual fantasy fans, and some of them are actually not that much into that genre and have enjoyed it anyway. And other people hated it and thought it was a load of rubbish. So, you know, I accept, you know, you're going to get all sort of opinions on this. But from my point of view, as with my background kind of studying history, with any period of history, you get things written after it which are interpretations of what happened. And you even get this with modern crime. If there's a car crash in the road and you ask the 10 witnesses what happened, you'll get a different story of the events from each of those. Yeah. Okay, so that's one side of looking at it. But then secondly, what we're talking about here is, as you described it, mythology.
Yeah.
This is myth.
Yeah.
And
that's, so I consider myself a Tolkien fan. I know that some of you, because I say that I like Rings of Power, will probably not agree with me.
unsub.
Yeah. But actually, Tolkien laid out in one of his letters that he wanted to create a mythology. But in his letter, he's actually saying that it's kind of a foolish thing for him to want to do. Now, some people have said that's him saying that he actually didn't, in the end, want to create a mythology. But it could just as easily and equally likely be him saying, actually, one man is incapable of creating a mythology. Because the mythologies that we have, and Tolkien was very aware of this, the mythologies that we have are built by multiple people with different outlooks, bringing their own things. The story of Beowulf that we had, that Tolkien loved, Tolkien was very aware that is not the original story of Beowulf. The original writer of Beowulf did not write what we currently have. It was changed over time. It was probably pre-Christian, and then Christian ideals were put into it. The same for his translation of the Green Knight, where he wrote a foreword to it, and he links in all of the earlier places where you find the aspects of the story. So Tolkien was 100% aware that a mythology is not one person.
It's a collective endeavour, yeah.
And it changes over time. And we're in a great position because it doesn't need to change for us, because we can store so much more than we were able to previously. So we still got the original stuff, and then other people can come and develop their side and their alternative universe. Yeah,
and you know, the parallel that I thought of as again studying medieval history is you look at the Arthurian romances and the various interpretations of them, you know, whether it's the French 13th and 14th century versions, whether it's Thomas Mallory's version, 15th century, they all vary as to what the character. If you just take one character, who was Galahad and what did he do? Who was Lancelot? What was Lancelot's background and what did he do? Who died when? How did they die? They're all different between all the different versions. So honestly, for me, when I look at a modern interpretation of something like Tolkien or anything else, really, Game of Thrones, anything, I'm kind of fine. It might sometimes annoy me, and this is true if you look at like Marvel's What If or even Star Wars. There've been alternate versions of Star Wars. Obviously now we've got the Legends, and then we've got canon, and it gets any of these essentially, you know, fictions, made up stories. They can have alternate versions. I think that's absolutely fine. And that's something that's happened for hundreds and thousands of years, whether it's the Siege of Troy or whether it's the Arthurian romances. This is a very old tradition, and I don't have a problem with that.
And then you can pick which one you like best, or you can just accept both.
You can pick which type of King Arthur you particularly like, which version, or which particular version of Lancelot you particularly identify with. And it's the same with Galadriel, bringing it back to Galadriel, and I personally don't mind that, you know, in the series in Rings of Power, that Galadriel, yes, is very different to the Galadriel that some of you wanted, you know, but that's the way it is. Whether the show continues and is successful, who knows? But there we go, just an alternate point of view. I kind of feel like we're maybe a minority on the internet on this, and we'll probably come under lots of flack for saying this. but
I was thinking, because today is the anniversary of the Battle of Agincourt when we're filming this.
Yes.
And I would much
Crispin's
rather,
Day.
That's it. I would much rather they make 10 Rings of Power than another The King.
Because
that was a real event and a real person, and real stuff, and they changed it. Or
Braveheart, Braveheart or The Patriot, two movies, coincidentally, or perhaps not, both Mel Gibson, that I would love to rant and rave on the internet about until the cows come home, because they were real historical events that were utterly butchered and misrepresented.
And that's a very different thing than taking a fiction and
reimagining
a new fiction.
Yeah.
Because they're not taking away the appendices. They're not going around, removing them from bookshelves. It's fine. Whereas when someone does that with a historical event, then actually that does take up the room. I've had friends who have said, but they wouldn't do it if it wasn't, they didn't have the research for it. They wouldn't be allowed.
People that blindly trust that what they see is history.
Because they see that it's based on historical events.
Yeah.
So I'd much rather they reimagined fiction than reimagined history.
Yeah. Anyway, on that bombshell, your comments very welcome underneath, and check out Zach's channel if you want to learn a lot more about armour and jousting and all of those sorts of things. Then check out that link below, and we'll see you again soon with another video on a more historically related topic. But nevertheless, this was partly historical, and I think it brings in other ways of looking at history as well, and how we have to remember that these myths and legends, and they're part history, part fiction, but a lot of the time how we interpret history as well. There's a lot of mythology wrapped up in how we interpret history. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.